Okay, so welcome along everybody to Dublin TEFL DT Open. Today with Simon Dunton, who's going to be talking about inclusivity and diversity in English language teaching and resources. We're very happy to welcome him here today, and very happy that you've all come along to join in and discuss and explore a very important issue in our field, something that doesn't get as much attention as perhaps it deserves. So thank you very much for coming along. If you haven't been to one of our events before, what we do in these events is generally a talk of about 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A with the speaker, and that's the format we'll follow today. Also, at around about at the end of this hour, wherever you are in the world right now, I'm going to stay around to talk about Dublin TEFL, and especially about our DIP TESOL course. We have two DIP TESOL courses running this year, one coming up very soon in April. Still time to register and apply for that. Details in the usual place on our website. Next week, it's worth mentioning, and I'm just going to copy a link for you. Next week, we do have another webinar, which we're announcing today. In fact, this is exclusive. I'm going to put it in the into the chat. Now there's a link to register, and it will be with myself and Emma, looking at the pedagogical puzzle. Look at that, I managed to say it. Maybe we'll do some pronunciation practice. The pedagogical puzzle or the pedagogical distance puzzle, sorry. Why don't I share a picture of that? This is what we're looking at next week. We're going to be looking and exploring the differences between online learning and in-person embodied face-to-face. I keep saying face-to-face for Zoom as well, so we're looking for the right words. I mean, embodied in-person experience of teaching. You know, very often people say, oh, it's just the same. Definitely there's things to transfer, but there's a lot of differences that are really worth exploring. And we're going to look at that next week on Wednesday. Now in Europe, the clocks will be going forward an hour this Sunday. So I put GMT +1. Do check out if you can make it from your time zone. It would be great to see you there. And we will have this up on the socials, as they say, on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter later today as well. Let me stop my share here. That's about enough of me twittering on. I'll be handing over the floor to our esteemed speaker. Simon, I'm going to remove my spotlight and you get ready to, if you could mute your microphones as a rule. I'm just going to do that immediately and unmute them. That includes our speaker, Simon, now. I've just muted you. Unmute them when Simon invites you, or if you've got questions at the end, but sometimes it helps with background noise. Like I say, that's enough from me. Let me hand over to Simon.
Thank you very much, Sean. Hello, everybody. Lots of familiar faces here and some new faces as well. Always good to see lots of people in these talks, and hopefully some of the ideas that we'll be sharing together here will be ones that we can share with groups, with colleagues, with peers, and of course with our learners when we are in the classroom, whether it be face-to-face or not. I'm going to start by sharing my screen to make sure everyone can see this. Is everyone okay? Everyone can see that okay? Hopefully nodding heads, that's good. I'm going to shrink the box so I can't see everyone's reaction, and hopefully that'll be a good thing for me. Throughout this talk, if there are comments or questions, as Sean said, please do put them in the chat box. I might, if I can, keep an eye on them as well and answer them as we go through, but there'll be time at the end where we can put in our penny's worth as well. And hopefully this can be a sharing as much as me just talking myself. I would hope that this is a really nice platform, and I'd like to prefix the whole thing by thanking Dublin TEFL for creating this platform and for inviting me and indeed all of us to talk about, as you said, this very important topic, and something that I hope lots of us, of course, in this room will already be interested in. And some of the people I can see, I will be mentioning your names as we go through. So to get started then, in terms of what diversity is and why it's important, well, there are a few points here on the screen. Hopefully you can see. Diversity is a huge topic, and there'll be things that are missing here, of course. The majority of my own research is around sexual orientation in the language classroom, but it's been expanding as time goes on to look at all types of diversity and including this within our language learning classrooms. And these, of course, reflect the world as it is as a whole. It reflects as well our learners and the people that we're working with in the language learning classroom. If we are trainers, it relates to some of the people we'll be training, so the course participants of things like the Cert TESOL or the DIP TESOL. And of course, it relates to us as the teachers and tutors as well. So it really, it's important for everyone that's involved in language teaching. And it's important for a huge number of reasons, some of which we'll be aware of, but it's nice to remind ourselves of these pedagogical underpinnings, that it's not just us morally thinking it's right to do this, although of course that's extremely important. It's also good as us, for people working in this field, to have underpinnings as to why this is important. So let's explore these just a little bit now. So I think many of us will be familiar with the idea of learners being involved and motivated in the learning classroom, and the more engaged they are with the materials they're using, with the language that's being offered to them, the better it will be for their learning processes and to help them develop in terms of language understanding and language use, i.e. their proficiency. So Mercer and Dornier just last year in their book about engaging language learners in the contemporary classroom, as part of this, they really tell us as classroom practitioners to remember that we've got to look at learners as individuals in each classroom, and the makeup of the class is going to be different for each class that we're teaching. And as they say here, planning our teaching to display sensitive awareness of this diversity, i.e. all of the things that we just looked at on that previous slide, and to accommodate differences in a positive way may be a vital inroad for our learners to find a connection to the tasks in class. We're going to look at some concrete examples of this and share some more ideas, but we can all think of ideas like having pictures and images that reflect our learners. If we can see ourselves as learners in the texts, in the course books, then we're going to engage with those a lot better, and it's going to help us with our learning proficiency overall. If a topic is something that relates to us in our real lives rather than just the lives of others, so that's important as well, then we're going to feel more attachment to that and therefore be more engaged again. And again, it all leads to better proficiency, ideally. Ashley Moore went into this a little bit further. This study was focused more on LGBT inclusivity in the classroom. And Moore says that classrooms should be a space for students to speak honestly as themselves, an affordance increasingly seen as crucial in the development of second language proficiency. So again, noticing, being able to notice yourself in learning materials, having the tools to talk about who you are in terms of all of the diverse things we talked about there, about our abilities, our languages, our home lives, our social economic status, sexuality, gender, race, all of these things. The more tools we have to be able to talk to ourselves about it, the better we're going to, the better chance we'll have here at developing our second language proficiency. Now I can't say it, proficiency as we move on. Moore last year went into more detail in this as well. So, and stated that part of our job as English teachers, or indeed all language teachers, we could argue, will always be to help our students find the language to describe the world around them. So while we were just looking at learners engaging with the text themselves, being able to talk about their lives, their family lives, their work lives, and all the people that they interact with, it's also important for them to have the language to describe what's going on in the world in general on a larger scale. This could be important to describe where they're living at the moment, or perhaps if they're going to be moving to a different area, or they have already moved into a different area, if we're thinking about ESOL, for example, being able to describe what they see in terms of the people they're interacting with on the streets, the things they're reading about, the things they can see on television, etc., etc. In her work in Cameroon, I think it's Gladys Focho, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that surname, so apologies if I've got that slightly wrong. She's been doing work with students in Cameroon, learning English as a second language, and integrating ideas of global issues into the framework of her lessons. So it's not just about the language. She's trying to show the importance to all of her students about learning these about global issues. And she states that it's imperative for students to be educated to become global citizens with regard to cross-cultural sensitivity, awareness of all global issues, cultivation of universal values, development of critical thinking skills, I need those 21st century skills that we are all working on, and experiential learning. So learning from experience, reflecting on those experiences, and so on. Further, she says, students need to develop empathic understanding for people of other cultures and concern for what is happening around the world. And this is all within the context of the language learning classroom. So with this background here, the importance of inclusivity and diversity in any language classroom is that it's important for the students themselves. It's important for them to be able to recognize themselves in what they're doing. It's important for them to be able to speak about themselves, their families, and their lives. It's important for them to be able to understand what's going on around the world in general, and to have sensitivity towards all cultures and indeed all diversity. Let's have a little look about how this is approached in resources currently. Here we're going to focus a little bit on course books in particular. Some of us may already be familiar with this acronym here, parsnip, and I believe it is an acronym rather than an initialism. I'm sure Ben Beaumont will correct me if that's wrong. This is an unofficial acronym, of course. Thank you, Ben, spot on. This is not an official acronym. It's not something that the big publishers, and I think we're aware of who those big publishers are, those that are producing the large, those textbooks that can be found around the world. And each of these letters stands for something that is generally not found, or at least up until very recently was not found. It was avoided by the producers of these or these textbooks. And I should make it very clear here, not the writers. There's lots of evidence of materials writers trying to include these things into materials. And of course, anyone that's been involved with published materials writing knows that that goes through a series of checks through editors, through publishers, and things get pulled back and changed, etc., etc. I can see the chat box is quite active, so I'm just going to put this one out here, a bit of interaction. Can anyone write any of the words that are part of this acronym here, the things from Parsnip that are generally not found in course books? Let's see some chat box interaction time here. Religion is there, politics is there. Yes, nice. Okay, we've got quite a few of them. Everyone seems to know pork, which is an interesting one. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Good. So yes, prizes for everyone, gold stars. Sean, I'm sure, is in charge of giving those out. So yeah, the sorts of things that we generally wouldn't find in these mass-produced course books would be politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms, and that covers so many things, and pork, of all things as well. So it's this kind of false idea that if we create a safe, vanilla, middle-of-the-road course book, we can sell this to a greater number of people, and more people will be willing to use it in their classrooms. To give you an idea of parsnip in action, or indeed parsnipping, we might call this, I'm going to show an example that's been used in other presentations, including my own presentations, but I think it just shows a really good, it's a very good demonstration of how this actually is enforced, even though it's unofficial. So here we can see an extract from Framework Level 2 Students Book from 2003. Level 2, I think, is sort of A2 on the Common European Framework. And this is part of a series of tasks that students are being asked to do. This, of course, is a gap fill, and it's all about past tense. Students have to fill in the gaps, basically, here of how people met, the context being how couples met each other. And we can see on the left, we've got here a German couple, Petra and Hans, and their story of how they met and how they got together. And on the right, we've got Simon and Ricardo, or maybe it's Simon and Ricardo from Argentina and how they met. This book was updated for a more international market. So this particular version was used, I think, somewhere in Southern Europe, maybe Spain, Italy, those areas. A few years later, a new edition that became a more global edition was created. And I'm just going to share that with everyone here, see if you can spot the difference between the two. And I'll just go back to the original and onto the updated version, again from 2008, 5 years later. And we can say a couple of things have happened. Petra and Hans have become happier and slightly more animated from the photo before, but more importantly, in the context of what we're looking at, this parsnipping, Simon or Simon has become Simone. So this has gone from being a same-sex couple where two men were talking about how they met to a couple that includes a man and a woman. The story is exactly the same. The gap fill is the same. A couple of pronouns have been changed. So this is an example of kind of a backward step, if you like, those parsnippings that we see in certain materials. This is one of many examples that you can find out there, things that have been changed. Why is this important? Well, Santos and Passos were doing some work on this. Just this year, they published something in ELT journal about the importance of inclusivity in terms of race in Brazil with the students that they were working with. So a really nice article. I advise everyone to have a little look at that. And they state that English teaching materials, such as textbooks, also play an important role in reinforcing cultural and ideological beliefs among learners. Some problems in the textbooks are the centrality of the native speaker, along with the erasing, stereotyping, and underrepresentation of minorities, and the overrepresentation of lifestyle, cultural elements, and communicative situations of white and socially elite characters. So here we have an example. Again, what they're putting forward is that because of this parsnip, again, unofficial, the materials aren't reflecting. So going back to that very first quote from Mercer and Dornier, they're not reflecting the students in all of our situations. They're not showing a full range. They're very white, very middle class, very happy in lots of ways, in the way that they're presented. So what can we do about this? We can see there is an issue here, and we can see reasons why it's an issue and reasons why we might want to tackle this issue. A couple of things we need to look out for in resources that we're using. And we're all very aware that sometimes in institutions we're asked, sometimes forced to use resources that maybe we don't feel are the best for our groups and our learners. Something we can do when looking at any resource that's been pre-made, and we're going to look at some other examples as well, is to really search for that invisibility, which seems like a bit of an oxymoron in a way. But as you're looking through textbooks, think about what's missing there in terms of all of the things we looked at on the first slide. When you're looking through the book, is everyone here happy, white, middle class, fairly wealthy people? What can we do to change this to reflect both our students and real life, making small changes? So look out for that invisibility. And I think something else we should look out for as well is the othering aspect. I'm not going to share any examples, but there are lots of criminal examples out there of people who sometimes have been quite well-meaning and have tried to include some sort of diverse ideas in the materials they have created. Often these are people that are self-published, but not always, and there are one or two very famous examples out there. And they will include items that talk about things like gay penguins, for example, a whole lesson on that. Questions asked, would you feel comfortable if you sat next to a transsexual on the bus. That's out there in a published material. Should we lock beggars up? You know, these kind of really contentious viewpoints that it's only going to lead to arguments between our students, perhaps making people feel quite uncomfortable in the classroom, and very often what we might call othering, asking our students to look at different people that are other from us, and describe how they're different, why they're different, whether it's right if they're different. So I think this is an important part as well. We have to be aware of both the invisibility and the othering that we find in published resources and self-published resources. And the other thing we might look out for as well are the exceptional cases. By this, I can think of a couple of examples. So if we take some young learner materials I was using not that long ago, there was a picture of a grandmother, and the students have to decide what kind of hobbies this grandmother might have. And it gets out all of this vocabulary like knitting and flower arranging and visiting their grandchildren. And then the sort of big reveal is when you turn the page or you switch on the video, she likes parachuting. Who'd have thought, you know, a person that's slightly older likes parachuting? It's making this an exception. Wow, an older person can like something else. Now, don't get me wrong, that can actually be a good lesson if done in the right way. It can, especially with young learners, I would argue, it can open their eyes. It can be part of the fun of learning the language. It can encourage them to talk about the things that their grandmothers do, or in some cases their mothers or grandfathers and grandfathers that are not traditionally seen as what older people do. So there is a possibility of using these kind of materials, but if we're only using them for these exceptional cases, then I feel that that's not in the right position. And Cynthia Nelson, again, talking about, she's focusing on sexuality in the ESOL classroom or the EFL classroom. She states that it's important not to set up tasks that ask students to evaluate or judge lesbian or gay people. That is, whether they are moral, whether they are normal, whether they are natural. And I think we could say the same thing for all of these areas. Okay, we're not othering people. We're not trying to create some kind of controversy or controversy. We're trying to be inclusive here. We're making people feel comfortable. We're opening up people's horizons or broadening horizons in some ways. Mentioned earlier in this talk. So what is out there already? Well, there are lots of things out there, and I know there are people in this room that have created some good materials as well. Tyson, I'm sure, will be able to share some of his materials that he has made for the there are LGBT inclusive. So, they're all available online, I believe. I'm sure he can talk more about that and maybe put the link into the chat box for us if he's interested in doing that. I know that Torsten Mörs and Lotte Koenig in Germany have done lots of work as well about integrating more global issues and, again, LGBT things, working with teenagers in ESOL or ESL classrooms. But one that I wanted to make special mention of here as a course material are the Raise Up materials. Sure, some of us might be interested in this, but and may already know about it, but I think what James and Ilar have done here is fantastic. So all of these materials are created on a volunteer basis. It's all done voluntarily, and each I think they have 4 levels now, so they're working their way through them. Their latest one, I believe, even has audio with it. But as you can see from the example here, this is particular about someone that's visually impaired, or and it's a story about them. It's a really nice integrated and well illustrated, I think, and well thought out piece of material that, from my own usage in my own classrooms, and I've only heard good things about this, works really well. And they have topics here that range from race, from poverty. They have things about abilities and disabilities, social economic statuses. There's some great things here. So I recommend, if you haven't, thank you, Helen, for putting it into the chat box. If you haven't had a look at this, do so. And all of the money raised for this goes back into charities. So it's a win-win-win-win-win situation for everybody here. So again, there are some resources out there that are tackling this issue, and I think they're well worth exploring. In terms of what we can do ourselves in our own classrooms, well, I'd set out there are a good number of things we can do. The first of those being to explore. So looking at things like the raise up materials that I've just mentioned here, and also again, exploring the materials that we already use with our learners, sometimes by choice, sometimes because our institutions ask us to do so. And again, thinking about the invisibility, the othering, and the exceptional cases. And then we can move on to sort of adapting those to be more inclusive themselves. Now, adaptation is something that we all do as language teachers and trainers in our classrooms. I think it's Mission and Timmins mentioned this as sometimes done as on an ad hoc basis, decisions that we make. This is going to work with our learners. This is not going to work with our learners. Sometimes on the spur of the moment, we're making these changes. But the adaptations we're talking about here are principled, and they're based on theoretical knowledge and observations of our learners, and from what we've done from our exploration in this first point up here. We'll have a look at some of these things in the next couple of slides. And this might lead us well onto the creation of our own materials. And again, some of these can be published, self-published. Teams like Raise Up are looking for more people to add to their volunteer list. So it's a good way to get into materials production and writing as well. And of course, you can share them with colleagues as well, as the point says here. And then it's about integrating them into the classroom. And when we're creating or adapting any of our own materials, of course, we need to use them with our learners, get some feedback from them, maybe feedback from our peers, think about how well they worked in the classroom or not, and reflect on this. So it's that cyclical process of creation, use, reflection, and then reuse of these things, adaptation, and so on. And we can do this within the framework of inclusivity as we work through this. And of course, I would say, again, a big thing about is sharing. And since the mass move to online teaching for obvious reasons last year, I think quite a lot of us have found ourselves adapting and creating materials and sharing them with each other. So it's been a really good time for us to put this into practice, to make sure that our materials are more inclusive that we're using with our learners. Some concrete examples, things that I've used, things that I've seen other people use to some success. And again, this is by no means perfect. This is we're in the creation and adaptation stage here. We can reflect on the use together here. So here's an example used with lower level young learners for an online lesson. Each slide that came up, they were looking at sports, of course. There was this focus, this zoom in on a picture, and the learners were asked to either say or type in what sport they thought was being represented here. Of course, I could all ask you to do that in the chat box to make sure you're all awake, and I will. So sport being represented in this picture is chat box interaction. Handball, that's a good one from Ben, thank you. Basketball, 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 basketball. Here we go. People are still awake, that's good to know. Of course, yes, and the big reveal, of course, yes, it is a basketball, right? The picture chosen to represent basketball here is more inclusive, but we're focusing on the fact that it's basketball, it's an inclusive photo. And the same was done with golf. I think there was ice hockey involved here. We also had water polo, because one of the members of the class is someone that takes part in water polo, so maybe a bit more unusual sport. And again, each one was zoomed in, they had to guess, and then zoomed out again. The reaction of the learners to these, let's have a look. So Masha or Maria, A2 from Russia, she said, because of course there was discussion after this, you know, have you ever played these sports? What do you think about them? Would you like to play them? Why not? Masha said, you have to be fast and strong to be in a chair and play good. This is a really nice moment, and an emergent language moment. I think Dublin, TEFL had Danny Davis, sorry, on just the other day talking about emergent language. This is a perfect place for it when we can talk about learning the word here, or maybe reminding the word wheelchair in here, or wheelchair user. This is how Maria had decided to interact with it. Misha also looked at the basketball and said, I don't like basketball because I'm not too tall. So he's interacting with it. Again, as normal, it's a more inclusive photo, and people can take what they want from it as we work through them. Another example used with a slightly higher level group, an online class. So they were asked to look at a schedule from the Lido or Lido cinema in New Zealand. So they're doing this online. They're looking at what's going to be on over the next week. And they were asked to decide which of the films that are being shown, so a bit of authenticity, did they think would be the best film for these people in the pictures. And before the pictures, we discussed what was represented by these pictures. And of course, we had here a young family, a group of teenage boys, an older couple, and a group of teenage girls. And there was a little bit of discussion immediately sparked here about who these people were, how they were related to each other. There was discussion about the young family, about whether we have here a family friend, perhaps, or the word adoption again came up from this, and fostering. These were all things that the learners themselves were questioning. What does this photo represent? What does it mean? And it's a chance for a learning moment about a global family. Now, I understand, of course, all of these people are happy, smiley, but we're in a happy, smiley kind of situation here. We're all off to the cinema. So again, photos can be changed, they can be adapted, and they can lead to interesting discussions about diversity at any level, and with young learners, with teenagers, with adults as well. Of course, a little bit of framework here was given to them about what best film would be and why. Some of the discussion brought up, Pasha or Pavel said, the grandma will not like the horror because it's scary. But Masha hit back with, why not? I watch these with my grandma sometimes, and my mum, we like it. So again, sort of challenging Pasha's perhaps stereotype that grandmas don't like horror films. These are small steps. These are little baby steps in some ways here, but it did open up a conversation, a peer-to-peer conversation between 12-year-old A2 students about these issues, which I think is quite a nice thing to have in here. Other work, of course, in terms of being inclusive might be if you're doing extended listening work or reading work or indeed watching work outside the classroom, it's thinking about what kind of videos, books, and podcasts, etc., to encourage your learners to look at. One that I used with a group of adults fairly recently was Africa Daily. Just happens to be a podcast that I find quite interesting, a recent find of mine. And in this one in particular, they had a lot of choice here. So there are lots of episodes of this. They had the opportunity to choose which episode would be of interest to them. And there are a whole variety of things. Each episode is about 10 to 15 minutes long. They had to talk, and then when we came together and had discussions in mini groups, they were talking about why they'd chosen a particular episode, what they learned from it, what questions they had to the presenter and the people on the podcast about the topic, and if they'd listened to more of these episodes. And we had things ranging from the effect of coronavirus in certain countries. There was one about piracy. Someone had listened to one about the upcoming Olympic Games and one country that was going to be involved for the first time in it. So again, the point of this is to broaden the kind of things that we're giving to our learners for these tasks. And this introduces them to sometimes it reflects where they're coming from themselves, their family background, or things they've experienced in their life. And also in terms of listening and watching things, it also broadens their horizons when we think about English as a global language. So it's a good excuse to listen to different accents, people using English in different ways, i.e. world Englishes. Another couple of simpler ideas that are not just based on materials, we can integrate ideas when we're presenting language or when we're working with emergent language as well. So here we have my hopefully visible board work here, where a grammar point has come up and with one example, and this has been explored on the board. So he's been living with his husband for 5 years. He's lived with his husband for 5 years. He lived with his husband for 5 years. Put up on the board, and in pairs or small groups, the learners were asked to discuss what the meaning, the difference in meaning is between these 3 sentences. Reaction. Flora from China at B2 level says, not out loud in her group, she says, there's a mistake because his husband, look. And Maria from Spain, again, a bit of peer teaching. No, he is married. He have a husband. It's okay like this in Spain. So again, this kind of learning about global society, learning about different things from not just the teacher, but from other students, where we have, as we said before, our students and our learners come from a variety of backgrounds in terms of their family life, in terms of where they've come from in different countries, etc., etc. When we introduce these kind of ideas into our lessons, then we allow learners, or we encourage learners to use all of this in whatever they're doing. And in many cases, they feel confident to use this kind of language and to include these topics into the things that they're producing. So in a kind of meet my friend setup, this is where students or learners can either find a picture of a friend on their phone, or they can just find a picture on the internet and use this as their friend, write a very short introduction about them and tell the group who their friend is. Manuela from Colombia decided on this picture, and her description of this person was, this is Dave. He's from America, but he's lived in London. I first met him in a bar. He is an only child. He has a boyfriend. He's a very happy person. Then people used the pictures and they decided together in different groups who would be good friends with who. And there was lots of discussion. So again, this is a very easy way of a learner in this case has seen the language being used in class, knows that it's a good environment to use and practice this language, and has decided to be inclusive in their description of Dave in this case. I think my last little idea here, although there are so many to go through, in terms of looking at language again, Anna from Spain says in the lesson, why do you say partner, not girlfriend or boyfriend? It's confusing, isn't it? And Vittoria from Italy says, my boyfriend, she told me I can't do it. So we're looking at questions and sentences coming up, or utterances from the learners, and what we do with these things when we hear them, whether we do it as a class discussion, small group discussion, or talk with the individuals. We might look at something, for example, like the word partner, and think about the differences in meaning and the ambiguity of this word in some cases. So for example, if we say she met up, or she met her girlfriend, it could mean this girlfriend is a friend, especially when we think about American English. This is not uncommon. Or it could be a partner in this case. He met his girlfriend. That's pretty solid that that's going to be a partner, but perhaps not always in some cases. He met his boyfriend, very likely that he's talking about a partner rather than a friend. And of course, there are more adaptations and more sentences to be added here. She met her boyfriend, for example, is missing from this one. So we can talk about words that are used, and the word partner, I think, is actually quite an important one because it can be ambiguous sometimes. Especially when we're teaching business English, for example, or people from a business background. Partner means a very different thing in that than it does in certain other situations. So it's looking at the language, it's looking at integrating ideas as a whole in a lesson. And then when learners have explored this a little bit, they're encouraged to use it in their own work. So Veronica from Italy here, in one of her diary entries, I'm quite a big fan of getting my learners to write diaries to practice, well, past tense, of course, but also some freer expressive writing. She's decided to use, because she's seen it used and we've discussed it, she's talked about what her partner and I did, her partner and she did that weekend. So again, introducing these things into the classroom allows, or sometimes encourages, allows is the wrong word, encourages the learners to use this in their own production. In summary then, I think I'm almost bang on 45 minutes, which never happens. So in a sort of summary, I think, and I hope that we're all agreed, and there's more work that needs to be done on this, undoubtedly, but we need to encourage everyone to acknowledge the importance of inclusivity and diversity in language learning. This is important for the learners, it's important for our course participants if we're training them, it's important for us as teachers, it's important for the world as a whole, so that people can talk about themselves, it's good for motivation, and interacting with the kind of work that we're asking the learners to do. And it's broadening their horizons and preparing them in some cases to experience the globalness of the world, I'm going to call it. In terms of the course books that we're using in the materials, I think it's important again that we encourage other people to notice any invisibility, any othering, or any overuse of these exceptional cases that I mentioned earlier in the language learning resources. It's also important for ourselves and also to encourage our trainees and our colleagues to create, adapt, use, and reflect on inclusive resources. And of course, that's a secular, and it's not something, it's a cyclical process and not something we do alone. It's really important to get feedback from the learners we use them with, from the trainees we use them with, and from our peers as well. It's important, I think, to explore inclusive language with our learners, picking up those emergent language, sometimes introducing concepts, words like partner, wheelchair, user, etc. Some of the words that have come up just in some of the slides that I've shown today. And for all of us to be sharing our ideas and resources. There's always a mistake in every PPT, and there it is. People may have spotted others, but there it is, right there, the last bullet point. Well done, me. Okay, so I think I'm, as I said, almost bang on there. I'm very happy for everyone to be involved in this questioning and question and answer section here. So I don't know if Sean, you've picked up any particular questions, or people have any questions that they'd like to put into the chat box, or indeed to speak up if they would be brave. I don't know if you've unmuted them yet.
Everybody is free to unmute themselves, in fact. So if you would like to ask a question directly, please do so. There's lots of great stuff in the chat in terms of sharing resources. So that's something we can continue. Maybe I'll gather these together, and when we do the sort of summary post on our blog, I'll add those. So if you've got any, please do add those there. Thank you so much, Simon. That was extremely interesting. There's some really great stuff there. I wonder, will the slides be available perhaps as a PDF? Could we do that with some of the?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I think we've got some. We'll sort out that last bullet point, and we can pop those up there because people often ask for those. That's fantastic. Okay. Would anybody like to ask any questions or share any experiences?
Yes, and I'd like to say thank you again to everyone for sharing those ideas in the chat box. This is all part of the sharing of resources, right? That's great.
Poe, thank you. You've got, how can we encourage publishers to not parsnip? Simon, any thoughts?
That is a good question. I guess it's for those of us working with publishers, it's to keep pushing these ideas forward. And I think I said it earlier on in the presentation, it's not the materials writers, it's often the publishers that are a bit scared sometimes for no particular reason. And I think the more we can encourage them and share ideas and show, actually, look at these resources that are being used here. This is the kind of thing that teachers want, that learners want. And I think also to again, share with publishers the underlying values of why this is important. You know, it's important for learners, it's important for the teachers. It's how far you'll get with that with publishers is another big question. But what's really nice is that we are in a community that's very willing to share their own resources. And the more we can share them and peer review them, if you like, not peer review in a kind of academic journal way, but share ideas with each other, then I think the better these resources can become.
That's a great point, I think. And it's in so many other areas of publishing, it takes a long time for the publishers to come around. But once they see a sort of grassroots movement that they can jump on a bandwagon with, if you like. I mean, that's a bit slightly unfair, I suppose, for a lot of people working in publishing. You know, they can be on board quite early. But once they see a sort of critical mass of things happening, and like you say, that peer review, if they see other teachers saying, this is what we want, these are the resources we want more diversity, we want, you know, we want our students to recognize themselves in the materials that are being used in class, then, you know, they slowly kind of get on board. Yeah, that's an important question. Angela, she had a good question about testing. I don't know of any developments in the testing industry in terms of inclusive and diverse materials myself. Maybe Simon, you do, being closer to Trinity College, which of course have a lot of testing, and Ben as well, if you're still around. You know, yes, it looks like you are. If anyone has anything to say on the issue of testing and inclusivity in test material.
That is a very, very good point. I can see Tyson's writing in here. Tyson is just searching around for us, which is always a good thing.
Great, thanks, Tyson.
Personally, I don't have much to say on that side of stuff at the moment. Although again, it's down to us as practitioners, I suppose, when we're asked to work on testing materials, sort of be more inclusive, to encourage the use of these things, and to show how they would work. I think that's sometimes the scary part for both publishers and testing areas. They're not sure how these things would work. So putting together something and showing, well, this is how it works. It's not that difficult, actually.
Ben, you've got a comment in the chat. I don't know if you're able to switch on your microphone or your camera. What part of ITE courses you're talking about?
Yeah, so that was just following up on Simon's point about encouraging. It's about encouraging the teachers to as well to use those resources, and I think teachers and teacher trainers have a role in that. As you said, it's about getting kind of momentum behind this idea. And in like CELTA courses and Cert TEFL courses, where we're starting to look at how we adapt resources, the kind of resources we do adapt. And then this is a perfect starting place to do that. So I think in terms of the assessment, for teacher assessment, I think that provision already exists. I think it's at how trainers move that forward. So I think that's one point, certainly to think about, that there's a kind of joint responsibility there. Yeah, that was it. Just a follow-up.
Many thanks. Thank you, Ben. That's a good point again from Angelos about how this links into teacher training like DIP and Delta. There certainly is scope for this in the DIP TEFL. That's something I was sort of saving a little bit for the SEG. SEG? Let's include both. The transition to the sort of final Q&A when I talk about the DIP, but there's definitely scope for looking at decentering and, you know, othering in materials from a variety of points of view, and it's something that we've integrated into our course plan at Dublin TEFL, in fact, where course participants can look as part of a project on the DIP TEFL. One of the aspects is you know, a participant-driven mini research project, and that's certainly an area you can look at. And of course, it's one area of the syllabus as well, looking at broader issues of context, race, language, that sort of thing as well, which could come up in an examination. So there's scope there. You know, that's something for us to look at. In terms of Delta, perhaps less so. I suppose it's the sort of thing that might come up in the exam. In the Module 1 exam, speaking just from my knowledge of that, but we'll not be talking about that so much today. I'm looking through, Tyson, you've brought up this point in your DIP TEFL course as well. Are you able to talk a little bit about that? I don't know if you can switch on your mic or anything.
Hello.
Hi.
I really only meant that, you know, Angelos had mentioned that he would bring it up in this DIP TEFL course, and I had done so too in the one that I teach on or tutor on. And some of the response was, more that it doesn't necessarily fit with the questions exactly. So having a separate module on its own for inclusive practices might not be the way to go from their perspective, but more so perhaps in Unit 2
Yeah.
than the Unit 1 stuff. So I don't know whether I agree with that or not, but that was the response sort of that I got.
Yeah, that's if people are aware of the DIP TESOL program and how that works. Unit 2 are the research projects, as I mentioned, and in the broader kind of exam in Unit 1, there could be some scope for it, but there's always a bit of guesswork. It's like, is this going to come up? Is it not? Simon, you're nodding a little bit there. It's your talk as well. I'm taking over. Were you nodding or just listening to music?
No, I think these are all very, very good points here, and there's more coming up in the chat box as well about how to integrate these into any of the cert or DIP courses. Yes, there's scope for it, like you said, in the perhaps in Unit 2 of the DIP TESOL, when you've got especially the independent research project, the third section there's scope for it there. I think there's also scope for it depending on the specialization, but for the level 6 cert PT, the certificate in practicing teachers, there would also be scope for it there, because that's all about creating, adapting, and evaluating, or using and evaluating teaching materials and resources. So I think there's scope for it there, depending on what your focus is.
Definitely. And I think, yeah, just general as a thread going through materials as well, of course, in lessons and so on, it's something that if you're working in teacher training, then it's something that you can kind of bring to a course as well.
Absolutely, it can be mentioned, you know, in cert training. And again, there isn't a materials assignment in the cert TESOL. That's one of the units there. So there's definitely some scope for it there to be discussed. Although, of course, it's just one small part of the cert TESOL. But again, it's like with any initial teacher training course, it's kind of the beginnings of something that you can, as teacher trainers, we can encourage the course participants to study this and look at this a bit further, you know. So I think that's the important part.
Helen, you've posted a good question. I was going to bring you in. I don't know if you are able to turn on your mic, because there was a recent set of articles, one of which you wrote as well, Helen, in TEFL Voices. Are you able to tell us a bit about that and maybe give us a link to a free copy?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Not put on the spot at all.
No.
Well, I first started thinking about inclusion in materials, not even related to LGBTQ, because I'm a non-binary person, by the way, to everybody who's noticed that it says that my pronouns are they, them. But when I was teaching a lesson about sports, Simon, and the flashcard for a team was a picture of 8 white boys who are blonde-haired, blue-eyed, wearing football jerseys, and a 9-year-old girl put up her hand and went, "Helen, that's wrong. Girls can play football too." This was in 2016 that this happened. So, I mean, not recently. And after that, I started making a lot more effort to create inclusive materials. And I think that the thing that teachers find hard is a lot of teachers who are not queer or who are not a minority and don't relate to those sorts of issues feel like they don't know how to do it correctly or how to integrate things the right way. They're not prepared to deal with student questions or cultural issues. I used to work for the British Council, and we did some really good teacher training on this. And the main issue that teachers that did the diversity training brought up was, I don't know how to answer these things. I don't know how to deal with if I have to deal with hate in the classroom. How do I respond when students are prejudiced? Like those sorts of things. And a lot of teachers just find that really intimidating. So more teacher training, I think, would really help with that. Like all teaching centers should have some like diversity training that would really help. Yeah, but going back to the point I was saying, kids know. Like they have access to the internet. They have friends who are queer. Like one of my students was like, "Oh yeah, my friend's non-binary." That student was 17. Like kids are really informed now and they have the internet. So, you know, I think Elizabeth Coleman's talk during the TDGI Carnival a couple last December, which was about race and queerness in ELT, which Tyson basically kind of co-organized. So he'd be the person to really talk to you about that. I spoke during it too. She raised the point that 50% of Gen Z, so the majority of our students, identify as some sort of queer identity, be it their gender or their sexuality. So if we're not representing queerness in our materials, then we're not representing them, and they're not seeing themselves, and they can't relate to it. And that's unfair to them, right? So we have to make sure we meet the needs of all of our students. Yeah.
I think that's a great point. That final bit, being able to recognize and be represented in the materials and in the classroom that students are coming to. And yet a lot of the photographs of happy, white, straight people, maybe not representative of the students, you know, they won't recognize that. It comes up a lot when people discuss authentic materials, you know, and there are a lot of definitions of that, but something I was listening to recently, Harry Kucha, who works in Cameroon. I believe he does a lot of work. He's doing a PhD somewhere in the north of England. I was going to say Warwick, but anyway, fantastic talk he was doing, and he was talking about materials design and the issue of race and culture. And just one thing he said, which stuck in my mind, was, yeah, authentic materials, great, but authentic to whose experience? And that can be so applicable to so many different kind of situations. It's like, okay, we need to be careful about the materials we're using and look at them critically. And if we're training, I think, and if we're on courses, we need to be discussing it and thinking about how we can raise that awareness in teachers in service training and pre-service training as well. Okay,
absolutely, and that comes down as well to that principled adaptation of materials, something that we often all do in our classes, and I mean in our classes, because we know our learners, their needs, and these things. So these are things that we can do on an individual basis, and it gives us agency as teachers as well to be able to do this. This is part of our responsibility and part of our job.
Definitely. I'm scrolling up and down the chat as well. If anyone has other questions or comments they would like to add. And yeah, very true. I totally agree, Poe, with the danger of it being tokenism as well, rather than something that sort of goes through everything that we're doing. Does anyone have suggestions on how to avoid tokenism? Probably don't do it.
I mean, don't have when you do pictures, try to do pictures of diverse groups. Try to have an actually diverse group. So not a group of all white people and one person of color, for example. Like box ticking. Don't just be, okay, here's my one picture of a queer couple and now everything else can be, you know, yeah, that would be like exceptionalism or tokenism.
It's a bit like you were saying at the beginning of the talk there, Simon, isn't it? It's like here's that sort of well-intentioned, you know, almost exotic or othering, like how would you feel if you met this person, or that sort of thing as well, right?
Yeah, and there are some quite odd examples out there of sort of someone just slapped on the edge of the group, and you just they don't feel it. I mean, if it's a group of friends, they don't feel integrated at all. Even if they are a group of friends, it's just, as you say, that's the tokenism, isn't it? Whereas we have access to so many pictures out there that there's got to be better examples of that to use.